It was the worst drought Minnesota had seen since 1956. Cornfields across the county were dying, leaves rolled tight, ears empty, farmers watching a full season disappear in the July heat. A salesman from Monsanto drove out to Vera Sundstrom's farm with a brochure and the company's best drought technology. She asked him one question. He couldn't answer it. So she walked him around the barn and showed him a field of corn that her grandmother had carried from Norway in a sealed clay jar in 1887. Still green, still growing, roots 31 inches deep, drinking from water the hybrid couldn't reach. The salesman folded his brochure and drove away. But that wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. The summer of 2012 arrived with a silence that old farmers knew how to read. Not the comfortable silence of heat building slowly toward a thunderstorm, the kind that breaks in the afternoon and leaves the air smelling of wet earth and grateful grain. This was a different silence, dry, hollow, and absolute. The kind of silence that comes when the sky has decided it has nothing left to give. By the third week of June, the soil across Minnesota's central counties had cracked into geometric patterns that looked like aerial photographs of a broken mosaic. The cracks were not shallow. A man could push 3 fingers down into the earth and still feel nothing but fine, powdered dust. The topsoil, which had taken 10,000 years of glacial deposition and organic accumulation to form, was lifting off in thin plumes at the edge of the fields, drifting slowly eastward with the afternoon wind. Across the street from the Sundstrom place, Lars Eriksson walked the edge of his cornfield on the morning of June 24th and did not say a single word for a full 15 minutes. His hybrid corn, DKC 5261, purchased the previous March for $312 per 80,000 kernel bag from a DeKalb dealer in Brainerd, stood at roughly knee height, which was 18 inches below where it should have been at that date. The leaves had already begun to roll inward, a thermal stress response the plants deployed when soil moisture dropped below the critical threshold. The rolled leaves reduced the evapotranspiration surface area, a last-ditch survival mechanism that also, inevitably, reduced photosynthesis. Lars knew what rolled leaves meant. He had been farming for 31 years. He went back to the house, called his wife, and told her they were going to have a difficult year. What Lars did not yet know, what none of the farmers along County Road 8 yet knew, was that 3/4 of a mile away, across a small woodlot of bur, oak, and aspen, a 74-year-old woman named Vera Sundstrom was walking her own fields and feeling something entirely different. Not optimism, exactly. Something older and quieter than optimism. Something closer to recognition. Vera Sundstrom had lived on the same 140-acre farm her entire life, with the exception of 3 years spent at the University of Minnesota studying agricultural extension, which she completed in 1970, and which she would later describe as useful for the textbooks and useless for the drought. She had returned to the farm at 22, taken over the operation from her mother in 1978, and had been running it largely alone since her husband Raymond passed from a heart attack in 1994, leaving her the fields, 2 aging tractors, a small herd of Angus cattle, and 312 stone crocks of heirloom seeds stored in a root cellar beneath the barn. The crocks were the important part. They had been accumulated by her grandmother Astrid, who had brought the first 37 with her from Sweden in the spring of 1887. The seeds double-wrapped in oilcloth and then packed inside glazed clay jars, sealed with pine resin, nested in a wooden chest that Astrid had refused to check as luggage on the SS Geyser sailing out of Gothenburg. Astrid had carried the chest herself, 12 pounds of it, across the Atlantic, and then by rail to street. Paul, then by wagon to the sandy loam uplands of Crow Wing County, because she understood something that emigration can strip from a person if they are not careful. The seeds you carry are not just food for the first winter. They are the compressed memory of every summer your family has survived. Astrid had written that in her diary on the night she arrived, the 11th of March, 1887, sitting in a rented room in Brainerd with the chest on the floor beside her bed, the temperature outside, 22 below zero. The seeds I carry are not for this winter. They are for all the winters I cannot yet see. My grandmother's corn, her grandmother's beans. If I plant them here in this new cold earth and they live, then I will know I have brought the right thing. The seeds had lived. They had survived the droughts of 1894 and 1910. They had survived the early frosts of 1918 and 1936. They had survived the wet rot of 1953, the brutal July of 1976, and the late-season freeze of 1991. Astrid's corn, in particular, a dense-eared, open-pollinated variety called Telemark Gold, developed in the highlands of Telemark County, Norway, sometime in the 19th century, and carried to Sweden by Astrid's own grandmother, who had received it from a Norwegian trader in exchange for wool, had proven over more than a century of Minnesota growing seasons to be something that modern seed catalogs could not easily quantify. Stubborn. By the time Vera inherited the crocks from her mother in 1978, the collection had grown to an estimated 287 varieties, including Telemark Gold, 17 other open-pollinated corn varieties, 62 bean varieties, 22 squash varieties, and numerous cultivars of oats, rye, and winter wheat. Vera had spent the following decades not merely maintaining the collection but systematically studying it. Beginning in 1984, she had started keeping detailed field notebooks, spiral-bound, olive green covered, each one labeled by year in her careful hand, tracking the root architecture of every variety she grew. She dug up sample plants at 14 days, 30 days, and 60 days after emergence, measuring root depth, lateral spread, and root hair density with a ruler and a magnifying glass, and writing the numbers in columns so precise they might have been produced by a laboratory instrument. By 2012, she had 28 consecutive years of root data for Telemark Gold, and 11 other corn varieties she rotated through her test plots. The notebooks filled a full shelf in her kitchen, above the telephone that still rang with a rotary bell. What the notebooks told her, consistently and without exception across nearly 3 decades, was this. Telemark Gold put down a primary root system that reached an average of 31 inches into the mineral soil by the time the plant was 60 days old. The modern hybrid varieties she had purchased for comparison purposes, DKC 5261, Pioneer P0954 AM. The others averaged 19 inches at the same interval. 12 inches. The difference was 12 inches of root depth, and in the summer of 2012, 12 inches was the difference between life and death. Dale Hutchinson arrived at the Sundstrom farm on the morning of July 3rd, driving a white Chevrolet pickup with a Monsanto Agricultural Solutions logo on the door. He was 39 years old, with a kind of confident, unhurried manner of a man who had made this particular pitch 200 times and knew exactly how it ended. He was not a bad man. He was a good salesman for a product he genuinely believed in, and he had spent the better part of the previous month driving County Road 8, watching hybrid cornfields fail in ways that he believed his company's newest drought-tolerant technology could have prevented. Vera met him at the gate. Hutchinson introduced himself, shook her hand, and began his presentation. He had brought a brochure, Monsanto's DroughtGuard Hybrid, a corn variety incorporating the CSPB gene from Bacillus subtilis, a soil bacterium that produced cold shock proteins, helping plants maintain cellular function under water stress, had demonstrated yield advantages of 5 to 15% over standard hybrids in severe drought conditions. In the current season, with Minnesota experiencing its worst drought since 1956, DroughtGuard was positioned to be, as Hutchinson put it, the technology answer to the weather problem. He handed Vera the brochure. Vera held it for a moment, turned it over, and then set it on the fence post beside her. She looked at Hutchinson with an expression that was not unkind. "What's the root depth on your drought guard plant at 60 days?" she asked. Hutchinson blinked. It was not the question he had expected. He thought for a moment and said that the root architecture data for drought guard was optimized for nutrient uptake efficiency, and that the variety had been bred for root-soil interaction under water-limited conditions. "That's not a number," Vera said. Hutchinson conceded that he did not have the specific root depth data available. Vera nodded. "Come with me," she said, and walked him around the barn to the test plot. The test plot was a quarter-acre rectangle of sandy loam that Vera had maintained as a controlled comparison field for 11 years. On the east half, she grew 3 standard hybrid varieties. On the west half, she grew Telemark Gold from her grandmother's crocks. The dividing line was marked by a single wooden stake painted red. The difference was visible from 20 feet away. On the east half of the test plot, the hybrid corn stood at approximately knee height, leaves curled tight into narrow rolls, the lower leaves yellowing at the margins. On the west half, Telemark Gold stood nearly 6 inches taller, the leaves open and dark green, the stalks thicker at the base, and the root crowns visible just above the soil surface, showing the dense, heavily branched network that Vera had been measuring in her notebooks for 28 years. Hutchinson stood at the red stake for a long moment and did not say anything. "The hybrids put their energy into top growth," Vera said. "They're bred for yield in good years. They're spectacular in good years. But their roots are shallow because shallow roots are efficient when there's plenty of moisture. These," she gestured at the Telemark Gold plants. "Their roots are down 30 inches by now. They're drinking from a layer of soil your hybrids can't reach." She paused, then added, "My grandmother figured this out in Norway in 1870. She didn't use a gene from a bacterium. She just kept the corn that didn't die." Hutchinson looked at the brochure on the fence post, then back at the test plot. He was a smart man. He could see what he was looking at. He picked up the brochure, folded it carefully, and put it back in his shirt pocket. "Mrs. Sundstrom," he said, "I think I came to the wrong farm today." He drove away at 9:47 inches the morning, and Vera went back to her notebooks. The drought of 2012 was classified by the U.S. Drought Monitor as a D3 to D4 event, severe to exceptional, across most of Minnesota's central and southern agricultural zones by mid-July. The national corn yield for 2012 would ultimately be recorded at 123.4 bushels per acre, down from 147.2 inches 2011, a decline of 16% nationally. In the most severely affected counties of the Corn Belt, central Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, yields fell to 62% of trend, meaning that fields that should have produced 160 bushels per acre were producing 99. Farmers who had planted on borrowed money, counting on trendline yields to service their debt, were facing a reckoning. In Crow Wing County, Minnesota, the drought was severe but slightly less catastrophic than in the Illinois core, because the sandy glacial soils of central Minnesota, while drying out rapidly, also stored residual subsoil moisture that the clay-heavy soils of the Illinois Corn Belt did not. This distinction mattered for Telemark Gold in ways that Vera had been documenting for nearly 3 decades. By July 20th, Vera's hybrid test plots were producing plants that had essentially stalled. The leaves had advanced from stress rolling to full desiccation at the margins, and the tassels, corn's pollen-producing structures, critical for fertilization, were emerging and shedding before the silks of the same plant were ready to receive them. This phenomenon, called tassel-silk asynchrony, is one of drought's most devastating mechanisms in corn reproduction. When the tassel advances ahead of the silk by more than 3 days, fertilization fails, and the ear produces no kernels. By late July, an estimated 74% of the nation's corn crop was rated in very poor to fair condition by USDA, and tassel-silk asynchrony was the primary cause. On the Sundstrom west half of the test plot, Vera made her daily measurements and found none of this occurring. Telemark Gold's tassels were emerging in synchrony with the silks, or within 24 hours of them close enough for successful fertilization. The plants were shorter than a modern hybrid at equivalent growth stage, perhaps 15 to 18% shorter in total stature, but they were fully functional. The ears were forming, the kernels were developing, the roots were, as Vera's measurements confirmed, pulling moisture from 32 inches below the surface, from a subsoil layer that had not yet fully depleted. She made a note in her green notebook on the evening of July 22nd, Telemark Gold, showing complete tassel silk synchrony at 91 days. Silks healthy, green. Root system at 32.5 inches measured this morning. Hybrids on east plot showing 40 to 60% tassel advance before silk emergence will be partial to total pollination failure. Moisture at 1/8 inch depth, 8.1%. Moisture at 3/2 inch depth, 17.4%. This is what she knew. The last sentence, "this is what she knew," referred to Astrid. Vera had written some variation of that sentence in her notebooks many times over the years, always after an observation that confirmed what the old seeds already understood. News travels fast along county roads when the news is bad. By the first week of August, Vera had received calls from 7 neighboring farms. Lars Eriksson was first, then Dottie Halverson, whose family had been farming the ridge ground east of the Sundstrom place for 4 generations. Then Ray Kaler, Pete Bjornstad, the Magnuson brothers, Earl Whitmore, and finally Tom Griswold, who farmed the largest operation in the county and who had, in previous years, been the most publicly skeptical of what he called Vera's heirloom hobby. All of them had come, or were coming, to some version of the same conclusion. The seed they had purchased, the expensive, technology-laden, computer-optimized hybrid corn that the agricultural extension offices and seed company representatives had been recommending for 30 years, was failing. And the old woman's crocks were not. Vera had anticipated this. Not with satisfaction, she took no pleasure in watching her neighbors lose a harvest. She had anticipated it the way a person anticipates a storm they saw coming on the horizon 3 days earlier. A storm that everyone else insisted would turn south before it arrived. She had been preparing for it, quietly, since early spring. In March, before planting, she had germination-tested seeds from all 8 corn crocks she intended to share: Telemark Gold, Midland Yellow, Rosso di Bergamo, Swedish Black, Blue Speckled Flint, Iowan Landrace, Longfellow Flint, and a nameless yellow dent variety that had been in the collection since 1912 and that Vera called simply the crow-wing corn. The germination rates ranged from 81% for the oldest crock to 97% for the most recent. She had planted out backup stock in her barnside nursery plot through June, propagating fresh seed from the strongest plants. By August, she had enough. Not enough for full farm-scale planting. It was too late in the season for that. The window for emergency planting had closed with the June drought. But enough for the neighbors to save their own seed the following year, to replenish what had been lost, to begin the slow rebuilding of a seed stock that, for most of them, had been completely abandoned in the shift toward commercial hybrids beginning in the 1950s. She gave each of the 8 farms enough seed for a 1-acre trial planting the following spring. She wrote each of them a 2-page handwritten guide on seed saving, covering selection, drying, storage in sealed jars, and the critical importance of keeping varieties at least 1/4 mile apart to prevent cross-pollination. She included, for each variety, a card with its full name, origin, and the note: "This seed has survived every drought in this county since before your grandfather was born. Plant it, save it, and give some to your neighbor." Lars Eriksson planted his Telemark Gold trial acre the following May. By August of 2013, in a season that was merely dry rather than catastrophically so, it yielded 61 bushels per acre compared to his hybrid's 78. He called Vera to tell her the yield was lower. "Of course it is," she said. "It's not bred for high yield in good years. Neither were you. But you didn't die in 2012. Lars thought about that for a while and then called back the following week to ask for 2 more acres worth of seed. In the fall of 2012, Vera's total corn harvest from her 4 2-acre corn ground came to 64.5 bushels per acre. The county average for hybrid corn that year was 41 bushels per acre. The state average was 138 inches normal years. In 2012, it fell to approximately 107. But Vera was not farming on borrowed money, and she was not selling her corn to pay a seed loan. She had been farming debt-free since 1998, when she had paid off the last of the operating notes she had inherited with the property. The 64.5 bushel per acre yield was not spectacular. In a good year, her hybrid comparison plots produced 155 bushels per acre, and even Telemark Gold, in a well-watered season with full sunlight, could push 80 to 85 bushels. But 64.5 inches, the worst drought since Eisenhower's presidency, meant the difference between covering her operating costs and not covering them, between being able to feed her cattle through the winter and having to sell them at distressed prices into a flooded market. She wrote in her notebook on October 3rd, the day she finished combining her corn ground, 64.5 bushels. I do not know what Astrid paid for these seeds. I know she carried them across an ocean. Today I think I understand why. Dr. Ellen Park arrived at the Sundstrom farm in the first week of November 2013, driving a university sedan and carrying a graduate student's notebook and a digital camera. She was 36 years old, a crop geneticist at the University of Minnesota's St. Paul campus, and she had spent the previous 11 months trying to understand what had happened to crop yields in Crow Wing County during the 2012 drought. The data anomaly had shown up in the county-level USDA reports. A cluster of small farms in the northern section of the county had outperformed regional averages by 22 to 36%, and the clustering was too spatially concentrated to be explained by soil type or microclimate alone. A county extension agent had pointed her toward Vera Sundstrom. Vera made coffee and showed Dr. Park the notebooks. Dr. Park did not say anything for a long time. She turned pages slowly, reading the columns of root depth measurements, the germination rates, the tassel silk synchrony observations, the soil moisture readings at different depths. She looked at the consistency of the methodology across 28 years, same plants dug at the same intervals, same measurements taken the same way, same handwriting for the first 17 years and then a slightly larger, more deliberate hand for the following 11, as Vera's eyesight required her to write bigger. She turned to the entry for the 22nd of July, 2012. This is what she knew. Dr. Park looked up from the notebook. Who is she? My grandmother, Vera said. She brought the seeds from Norway in 1887. She grew up farming in drought country, in the highlands. She chose these varieties because they were the ones that survived. Dr. Park asked if she could study the seeds. She was interested, specifically, in the root architecture question, whether the deep root phenotype of Telemark Gold was genetically stable, whether it was heritable, whether it could be characterized at the molecular level and potentially incorporated into modern breeding programs. She explained the science carefully and honestly. She did not know yet what she would find. She was not promising that the seeds would prove commercially viable, or that the university would be able to do anything with them beyond documenting their characteristics. She was promising only that she would take the work seriously. Vera thought about this for several days. Then she called Dr. Park and said yes. The research project that followed was formal and unglamorous in the way that most good agricultural science is, slow, repetitive, and dependent on weather that didn't cooperate. Dr. Park's team planted Telemark Gold and 6 other Sundstrom varieties, alongside standard hybrids in replicated trial plots at the St. Paul Agricultural Experiment Station, beginning in the spring of 2014. Growing them under both well-watered and drought-stressed conditions, and measuring root architecture at weekly intervals, using a combination of the manual excavation method Vera had developed and a newer shovelomics protocol that photographed the root crown and analyzed it with image software. The results, published in the American Journal of Plant Sciences in September 2016, confirmed what Vera's notebooks had been recording since 1984. Under drought stress, Telemark Gold produced primary seminal roots that reached a mean depth of 29.7 inches at 60 days, compared to 18.3 inches for the commercial hybrid standard. The mechanism appeared to be a combination of greater primary root elongation and a steeper root growth angle roots that grew more directly downward rather than spreading laterally, consistent with the steep, cheap and deep root architecture phenotype that Penn State researchers had been independently studying at the same time. The paper cited Vera's 8-year dataset as an exceptional longitudinal record of root phenotypic performance under naturalistic field conditions, representing a methodological contribution independent of the genetic analysis. Dr. Park had used one of Vera's notebook photographs as a figure in the paper. The photograph showed a Telemark Gold root system excavated on the 1st of August 2012, the heart of the drought reaching 33 inches into the dry soil, the root tips extending into a moisture band visible in the cross-section of the pit. Beside it, for scale, Dr. Park had placed an excavated hybrid root ball of equal age, dense, vigorous-looking, but ending abruptly at 19 inches, the root tips brown and desiccated where they had run out of reachable moisture. The caption read, "Left, Telemark Gold, OP variety, Sundstrom collection, 60 DAP, field conditions, Crow Wing County, MN, the 1st of August 2012. Right, DKC 5261 hybrid. Same field, same date, same age. Root depth differential, 14 inches. Vera kept a copy of the paper in her kitchen, tucked inside the cover of the 2012 notebook. The deposit to the Svalbard Global Seed Vault came in October 2017. It was not a sudden decision. Dr. Park had raised the idea in 2015, and Vera had spent 2 years thinking about it, not because she was reluctant to share the seeds, but because she wanted to be certain the varieties were properly characterized before they were frozen into a kind of institutional permanence. She wanted each variety to have its full name, its full history, its germination protocol and storage conditions documented, not just archived as a genetic sample without context. Seeds without stories, she told Dr. Park, are just dead things waiting to be lost again. The deposit ultimately consisted of 47 varieties from the Sundstrom collection, the largest single farm-source deposit in the vault's 9th year of operation from the upper Midwest region. Each variety was accompanied by a document that Dr. Park's team had compiled from Vera's notebooks and from historical records tracing the provenance of each variety as far back as the documentation allowed. Telemark Gold's document ran to 11 pages, beginning with Astrid Sundstrom's March 1887 diary entry and ending with the 2016 AJPS publication. The vault's records listed the depositing institution as the University of Minnesota Plant Genetics Resource Unit, with a supplementary attribution note reading, "Original source collection maintained by V. Sundstrom, Crow Wing County, Minnesota, compiled from 1887 by A. Sundstrom and descendants." Vera did not travel to Norway for the deposit ceremony. She was 79 years old by then, and the journey seemed less important to her than the fact of the thing itself. She received a certificate in the mail 3 weeks later, printed on heavy cream-colored paper with the Norwegian government seal, and she put it in the frame that had previously held a photograph of her husband Raymond, and hung it on the wall of the kitchen above the shelf of green notebooks. That evening she wrote in the current year's notebook, "The seeds are in the mountain now. I think Astrid would have liked knowing that. She carried them so far already, a little farther seems right." The spring of 2013 had brought something Vera had not entirely expected: students. They began arriving the summer after the drought. First as Trickles, a graduate student from the Extension Service here, a young woman doing a county 4-H project there, and then, after Dr. Park's paper came out in 2016, in a steadier flow. They came to see the notebooks. They came to see the crocks in the root cellar, the rows of glazed clay jars sealed with pine resin and packed in dry wood shavings that Vera replaced every 3 years. They came to learn the seed-saving method that Vera had inherited from her mother and refined over 4 decades. The importance of selecting only from the 10 strongest plants in each variety's plot each year. The importance of allowing full, open pollination within the variety rather than hand-pollinating. The importance of drying the seed to exactly 11% moisture before sealing it. The importance of the glazed clay jar itself, a material whose fired surface was impermeable to moisture and whose thermal mass buffered temperature fluctuations in the root cellar without the condensation problems that metal or plastic lids caused. A jar like this costs $3 at a farm auction, Vera told a group of 6 University of Minnesota undergraduates who visited in September 2015. The seed inside it is priceless, not because it's rare, but because it's right. It's right for this soil and this climate, because it has been selected for this soil and this climate for 125 years. No company owns it, no patent covers it. Anyone can grow it, and the only way to lose it is to stop planting it. She paused and looked at the row of crocks that lined the root cellar wall. My grandmother brought 37 of these from Sweden. There are 312 of them now. Some of them have died over the years, varieties I couldn't maintain properly. Years when the seed stock got too old or got wet. Each one I lost, I wrote down in the notebook. Each one I saved, I wrote down too. I don't know which list is longer. I've never counted. One of the students asked her how she had known, in 2012, that the heirloom corn would outperform the hybrids. Vera looked at the student for a moment. I didn't know it the way a forecast knows something, she said. I knew it the way you know a person after you've lived with them for 30 years. The data was there. I had been collecting it since 1984, but the truth of it was older than the data. My grandmother knew it. Her grandmother knew it. They knew it without root measurements and without American Journal of Plant Sciences. They knew it because they had watched the corn live and die for enough seasons to understand what it was. She picked up one of the smaller crocks from the shelf, turned it in her hands, and set it back. The data confirmed what they already knew. That's all the data ever does. In the years following the Svalbard deposit, the Telemark gold story moved through the agricultural research community in the way that genuinely useful ideas move. Slowly at first, then suddenly. Dr. Park's 2016 paper was cited 14 times in its first year and 31 times in its second. By 2020, it had accumulated 112 citations, making it one of the more widely referenced papers in applied crop genetics for that period. The root architecture findings influenced a breeding program at Iowa State and contributed to a broader reconsideration within the industry of the steep, cheap and deep root architecture as a drought-tolerant strategy that had largely been overlooked in decades of yield-focused hybrid development. None of this reached Vera directly in any form that mattered much to her daily life. She continued to plant her 42 acres of corn each spring, continued to save her seed each fall, continued to share crocks with any farmer who asked for them. She updated her notebooks through the summer of 2021, her handwriting growing larger still but remaining legible and precise, the columns of numbers as neat at 83 as they had been at 46. She did not stop farming. Her great-niece Kira, 26, had come to live at the farm in 2019 and was learning the seed-saving method with an earnestness that Vera described in the 2020 notebook as better than I hoped, which is all you can ask. Kira had grown up in Minneapolis and had studied environmental studies at Macalester College and had, she told Vera, always known she was going to come back to the land eventually. She had not known, until she arrived at Crow Wing County, that the land she would come back to would have this particular kind of urgency and history embedded in it. Vera died in January 2022, at the age of 84, in the farmhouse where she had been born. She had planted her last season in 2021, completing 37 consecutive growing seasons of systematic root architecture data collection. The final notebook, volume 28, olive green, labeled in large, careful letters, 2021 root, study year, 28, was found on the kitchen shelf where it had always been kept, the last entry dated October 9th. The entry read, Telemark Gold Final Yield 2021, 79.5 bu, acre, best yield in 12 years, roots at 60 days, 31.5 inches mean depth. Kira has the seed for next year. I think it will be fine. Vera Sundstrom planted the 2022 season in May, 4 months after her great-aunt's death, using seed saved from Vera's 2021 harvest. She expanded the corn ground from 42 to 55 acres, not aggressively, but with the deliberate intention of maintaining enough production volume to continue distributing seed to the 8 neighboring farms that now depended on the Sundstrom collection as part of their rotation. She also began, with Dr. Park's help, digitizing the full archive of Vera's 28 notebooks, scanning each page, entering the root data into a database that could be analyzed with modern statistical software. The dataset, when completed, would represent 28 years of daily field observations across 12 corn varieties, with root measurements at standardized intervals, soil moisture readings at 3 depths, and phenological observations, including tassel and silk timing, ear set, and leaf architecture. Dr. Park estimated that the completed database would contain approximately 340,000 individual data points. She described it, in a letter to Kira, as one of the longest continuous single-location phenotypic records in the history of American crop science, maintained by a non-institutional observer. By 2024, Telemark Gold had been grown continuously on the Sundstrom farm for 62 consecutive seasons, dating from Vera's own first planting in 1962. The variety had been deposited in Svalbard, studied by 2 major research universities, cited in 37 scientific publications, and shared with 14 farms across Crow Wing County and 3 neighboring counties. It remained, in principle, exactly what it had always been: a dense-eared, open-pollinated corn from the highlands of Telemark, Norway, carried in a glazed clay jar across an ocean by a Swedish immigrant woman in the spring of 1887, planted in the sandy loam of central Minnesota, and selected every year for 137 years by the simple, non-negotiable standard of survival. Kira kept the crocks in the same root cellar. She replaced the wood shavings every 3 years, as Vera had taught her. She sealed the jars with pine resin made from the bur oak woodlot at the north edge of the property. She kept her notebooks on the same shelf above the telephone, though her notebooks were black rather than olive green, a small difference that she had decided was acceptable. She selected seed each fall from the 10 strongest plants, dried the kernels to 11% moisture, and packed them into the jars with the quiet, unhurried attention of a person doing something that they understand to be more important than themselves. In the spring of 2025, she sent a crock of Telemark Gold to a young farmer in Wright County who had written to ask if such a thing still existed. She included the 2-page handwritten guide that Vera had written, and a card with the variety's name, its origin, and the note that had not changed in 30 years. This seed has survived every drought in this county since before your grandfather was born. Plant it, save it, and give some to your neighbor. At the bottom of the card, in her own hand, Kira had added one line. It has come a long way to find you. Don't let it end here. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault, carved into the permafrost of a Norwegian mountain 1,300 kilometers above the Arctic Circle, currently holds more than 1.3 million seed varieties from nearly every country on Earth. The facility was designed to withstand nuclear war, rising sea levels, extended power failure, and the collapse of the global food system. It is the most secure backup of agricultural genetic diversity ever constructed, and it operates on a simple principle: that the diversity of seeds accumulated over 10,000 years of human agriculture represents a form of knowledge and resilience that cannot be reconstructed once it is lost. The 47 varieties deposited from the Sundstrom collection occupy a small section of one shelf in one of the vault's 3 chambers. They are surrounded by seeds from agricultural institutes in 62 countries, gene banks maintained by governments and universities, and international organizations with budgets and staff, and institutional permanence that a single farm in Crow Wing County, Minnesota, cannot replicate. But they got there the same way they always got anywhere. Someone carried them. A woman from Telemark who gave them to a woman from Gothenburg, who carried them in a wooden chest across the Atlantic and by wagon to a piece of sandy loam in central Minnesota, who gave them to a daughter, who spent 28 years writing down what the roots were doing and why it mattered, who gave them to a great-niece, who sent a crock to a young farmer in Wright County with a note about what to do next. The seeds in the stone jars have come a long way. They are not finished yet. Technical note: the 2012 U.S. drought was classified as D3, D4, severe to exceptional, by the U.S. Drought Monitor across 55% of the continental United States, representing the most widespread drought event since 1956. National corn yield fell to 123.4 bu acre. USDA NAS, January 2013, down 16% from the 2011 average. Tassel silk asynchrony under drought stress is a well-documented reproductive failure mechanism in Zea maize. Synchrony within 24 hours of silk emergence is the threshold for successful pollination. Root architecture research confirming the drought resilience advantage of steep, deep root systems in maize was published by Lynch et al., Penn State, multiple years, and is consistent with the field observations in the Sundstrom notebooks. The Svalbard Global Seed Vault opened February 2008 and accepts deposits from recognized gene banks and institutional depositors. As of 2024, it holds 1.3 million seed samples.